Welcome to one of the most disturbing cases ever recorded in history. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time at which you're listening to this narration. We're interested in knowing which places and at what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. In the scorching summer of 1877, deep within the unforgiving sun-baked expanse of the Nevada desert, a group of ambitious silver miners vanished without a trace, leaving behind only the chilling echoes of a discovery that should have remained buried. What they unearthed was not merely a fortune in precious metal, but something far more ancient, far more malevolent. Strange, intricately shaped stone pillars that pulsed with an unholy energy, whispering secrets that twisted the mind and dissolved the body. Those who dared to touch these primeval monoliths slowly disintegrated into the very sands they sought to conquer, their screams swallowed by the infinite silence of the desert. The desert, you see, holds more than just gold and silver. It guards secrets so profound, so terrifying, that they can unmake a man from the inside out, reducing him to dust and memory. This is the harrowing, forgotten story of the Silver Vein Prospectors, their ill-fated quest for riches, and the ancient whispering stones that claim them all, not just their lives, but their very essence. The year 1877 found the American West in the frenzied throes of a brutal silver rush. The Comstock lode in Nevada had for decades fueled dreams of instant wealth, drawing men from every corner of the globe into the rugged, untamed wilderness. Fortunes were being made and lost in the blink of an eye, the allure of untold riches, a potent, almost hypnotic siren call that beckoned men into the most desolate, God-forsaken corners of the Nevada Territory. Among these desperate dreamers was Elias Thorne, a weathered and grim prospector in his late 40s, whose face was a roadmap of sun-baked wrinkles, countless disappointments, and dashed hopes. His eyes, though weary, held a steely glint of ambition, a burning, almost desperate conviction that drove him forward. Elias had seen his share of false leads, empty claims, and back-breaking labor that yielded nothing but sweat and dust, but a deep-seated, almost pathological hunger for the elusive. Mother Lode kept him pushing, always pushing. He believed, with an unshakable, almost messianic faith, that the true treasures lay not in the well-trodden, exhausted paths of established mining towns, but in the untouched, forgotten expanses of the Black Rock Desert, a place most men considered cursed, too barren and unforgiving for human habitation, let alone a fortune. With him were his younger brother, Jedediah Thorne, a strapping but perpetually nervous man of 30, whose boisterous optimism often clashed with Elias's grim cynicism. Jedediah, a former sailor from the Atlantic coast, was ill-suited for the harsh desert life, but his loyalty to Elias was unwavering, a bond forged in shared hardship and a desperate hope for a better future. There was also Jacob Dusty Miller, a former blacksmith from Ohio, a powerfully built man in his mid-40s with hands like anvils, a quiet, watchful demeanor, and an uncanny ability to find water where none seemed to exist. Dusty was a man of few words, but his intuition was sharp, his senses attuned to the subtle shifts of the wilderness. Finally, there was Tommy Finch, a young, eager greenhorn barely out of his teens, whose naive dreams of striking it rich and escaping his impoverished past in Boston blinded him to the desert's inherent, insidious dangers. Tommy was full of boundless energy but utterly lacking in experience, a lamb led to slaughter. The four men, a disparate collection of hope, ambition, and desperation, formed the Silver Vein Prospectors, and their shared ambition was as vast and unforgiving as the desert itself. Their destination, known only through Elias's cryptic hand-drawn maps and hushed whispers, was a remote, unmapped area of the Black Rock, rumored by old Paiute tales to be a place of singing stones and swallowing sands. Most scoffed at such primitive superstitions, educated men of the era dismissing them as the fanciful fears of an unenlightened people. But Elias, having spent decades surviving in the raw, unforgiving wilderness, held a grudging, almost subconscious, respect for local lore. He knew that sometimes the old stories held a kernel of truth. Before setting out, he sought out an old Paiute elder, a wizened woman named Chaitin, whose eyes, ancient and piercing, held the wisdom of generations etched into their depths. Chaitin, her voice a dry rustle like wind through brittle sagebrush, warned him against the heart of the mountain's voice, a place where stones drink light and speak with stolen tongues, where the earth hungers for what is not its own. She spoke of pillars that were not of this earth, of a time before time, when the desert was not desert, but something else entirely, a living, breathing consciousness. Elias, though profoundly intrigued by her intensity, dismissed her warnings as mere metaphors, poetic ways of describing geological formations or spiritual beliefs. He was looking for tangible silver, not ancient spirits. He believed her words were simply meant to deter intruders from sacred tribal lands, a common, understandable tactic. He paid Chaitin with a handful of tarnished silver coins and a sack of precious flour, thanked her curtly, and, ignoring the profound unease stirring within him, headed deeper into the scorching, silent wilderness, towards his destiny. Their journey was arduous, a slow, agonizing crawl across an endless canvas of cracked earth and burning sky. The relentless, merciless sun beat down from a cloudless sky, baking the earth into a cracked, unforgiving crust that shimmered with heat. Water was a constant, agonizing concern, each sip rationed, each well a distant, desperate hope. Mirages danced mockingly on the horizon, shimmering oases that dissolved into nothingness, mocking their thirst and twisting their minds. Weeks turned into a grueling, soul-crushing month, pushing the men to their absolute physical and psychological limits. Tommy, initially buoyant and full of youthful enthusiasm, grew quiet, his eyes wide with a fear he couldn't articulate, a dread that seeped into his very bones. Jedediah, usually jovial and prone to boisterous songs, became irritable, snapping at shadows, his nerves frayed by the oppressive silence and the constant threat of dehydration. Dusty, ever stoic and observant, simply watched, his gaze often fixed on the distant, shimmering heat haze that seemed to distort the very fabric of the landscape, warping reality itself. Elias, consumed by his obsession, ignored their complaints, their exhaustion, their growing fear, pushing them harder, always forward, his own thirst for silver overriding all compassion. "Silver doesn't dig itself, boys," he'd bark, his voice a raw, rasping croak from dust and dehydration, his eyes fixed on the unseen horizon. Then, one blistering afternoon, as the sun began its descent, painting the vast empty sky in fiery hues of orange and crimson, they saw them, rising abruptly, almost violently, from a vast, sunken basin perfectly concealed by the undulating dunes and treacherous labyrinthine rock formations, stood a cluster of magnificent yet profoundly unsettling monolithic stone pillars. There were 7 in total, arranged in a strangely precise, non-symmetrical pattern, unlike anything natural or man-made they had ever encountered. They were not carved or hewn in any recognizable human style. There were no chisel marks, no signs of tools. Yet their surfaces were covered in intricate, swirling patterns, a flowing, almost organic script, unlike anything any of them had ever seen, a language of pure form. The stone itself was a deep, obsidian-like black, absorbing the harsh desert, light yet shimmering with an internal, almost liquid quality, as if it contained a trapped, pulsating energy. A faint, almost imperceptible hum resonated in the air around them, a low-frequency vibration that felt deep within their bones, a resonance that echoed the beat of their own hearts, Not quite a sound, but a pervasive, unsettling feeling. It was a place of eerie, alien beauty and profound, unsettling, primordial stillness. A silence that seemed to weigh down on their very souls. By God, Elias, what in tarnation are those? Jedediah gasped, his usual bravado replaced by a look of bewildered awe and mounting terror. His hand instinctively went to his sidearm, but he made no move to draw it. Paiute's singing stones, Elias whispered, a new unfamiliar dread mingling with the triumphant thrill of discovery. They weren't just stories. Chaitin, she knew. A flicker of doubt, cold and unwelcome, entered his mind. Dusty, usually unflappable and grounded, crossed himself, his calloused fingers fumbling with his rosary beads, his eyes wide with a primal fear he couldn't hide. This ain't right, Elias. This ain't natural. We shouldn't be here. Tommy, however, impatient and utterly oblivious to the subtle warnings, was already halfway down the slope, his eyes gleaming with a manic, almost feverish excitement, a gold-induced delirium. Silver. It has to be. Look at how it shines. A whole mountain of it, he pointed, his voice cracking with anticipation. Ignoring Dusty's dire warnings, Jedediah's growing unease, and the profound, oppressive silence that had fallen upon the basin, Elias, fueled by the insatiable prospector's fever and a hunger that mirrored the desert's own, rushed down towards the pillars, his heart pounding with a mixture of greed and an unbidden, terrifying curiosity. Tommy, heedless, was close behind him, his boots kicking up dust. As they drew closer, the faint, pervasive hum intensified, vibrating through their very teeth, rattling their brains. The air around the pillars grew strangely still, completely devoid of the relentless desert wind, yet paradoxically cool, almost cold, under the scorching sun. The intricate swirling patterns on the obsidian stone seemed to shift and writhe, an optical illusion caused by the oppressive desert heat, or something far more sinister, a subtle, undulating animation of the patterns themselves. Elias, driven by an irresistible compulsion, reached the base of the largest pillar, a monolith that dwarfed him. He ran his calloused hand over its smooth, cool, almost slick surface. The stone felt unnaturally cold, absorbing the heat from his touch, drawing it in. As his fingers traced the swirling, impossible patterns, a faint, almost inaudible whisper brushed against his mind. Not a sound in the external air, but a direct intrusive thought, a telepathic intrusion. It spoke of ancient secrets, of primordial earth, of vast forgotten knowledge, of times before stars, before light, before man. It promised him understanding, dominion, a glimpse into the very fabric of existence. Elias gasped, pulling his hand back as if burned by an invisible fire, his mind reeling from the sudden, overwhelming influx of alien information. What was that, Elias? What happened? Jedediah cried from a distance, frozen on the slope, having witnessed Elias's sudden, violent reaction. It spoke, Elias stammered, his eyes wide with a terrifying mixture of primal fear and an insatiable wonder, his voice barely a whisper. It showed me things, impossible things. Tommy, oblivious to Elias's profound revelation and the growing dread, impatient and driven by his own blind greed, had already reached a smaller, yet equally ominous pillar. Without a moment's hesitation, heedless of the warnings, he placed both hands flat against its surface, a wide, excited, almost manic grin spreading across his youthful face. Cold as a witch's tit. But look, it's almost glowing. We're rich. Boys, rich beyond measure. Then the true, unspeakable horror began. Tommy's manic grin slowly, agonizingly, faded, replaced by a look of utter, unimaginable terror. His body stiffened, his muscles tensed into rigid knots, and a low, gurgling moan, filled with an unearthly agony, escaped his lips. The intricate patterns on the pillar began to glow faintly, reflecting with an eerie, internal light in Tommy's wide, horrified eyes. His skin, as if touched by an invisible, desiccating fire began to shrivel, to crack, to dehydrate at an unnatural speed. His clothes, once sturdy denim and rough canvas, seemed to fray and disintegrate into fine dust, falling away from his rapidly shrinking form. Jedediah and Dusty watched from the slope, paralyzed by an incomprehensible horror, as Tommy's very flesh seemed to melt, to turn into a fine, gray, shimmering sand that sifted through his fingers and pooled at his feet. His screams, initially sharp and piercing, became muffled, choked, as his throat, his vocal cords, turned to dust, absorbing all sound. His eyes, the last to go, whitened, then imploded inwards, leaving empty sockets. Within moments, where the vibrant young man Tommy Finch had stood, there was nothing but a small pile of fine, gray dust, a few tarnished buckles from his boots, and the faint, sweet scent of ozone mixed with dry earth and something else, something cloying and ancient. The pillar, no longer glowing, seemed to pulse with a dark, satisfied, almost triumphant energy, a deep, silent beat. Jedediah screamed, a raw, primal sound of pure, unadulterated terror that echoed across the silent basin. "Tommy! Oh, God, Tommy, what was that?" He stumbled, almost falling. Dusty, his face ashen, his usual stoicism shattered, grabbed Jedediah, pulling him back with immense strength. "Don't touch it! Don't go near it, Jed! It swallowed him whole. It consumed him." He dragged Jedediah further, up the slope, away from the silent, watchful pillars. Elias, still shaken by the pillar's intrusive whisper, watched the dust settle, his prospecting fever replaced by a profound, soul-shattering horror. He had dismissed Chayton's warnings, the ancient wisdom of the Paiute, and now Tommy was gone, absorbed by these monstrous, primordial stones. "The heart of the mountain's voice," he muttered, the Paiute elder's words echoing with terrifying, prophetic clarity in his reeling mind. "It drinks light and speaks with stolen tongues, and it swallows men." It was never about Silver. Panic, raw and absolute, gripped the remaining 3 men, an insidious parasite that burrowed into their minds. They scrambled back up the slope, away from the silent, watchful pillars, their minds reeling from the impossible, reality-defying horror they had just witnessed. They barely spoke during the frantic, desperate ride away from the basin. The grotesque image of Tommy dissolving into dust burned into their minds, an indelible scar on their sanity. They rode relentlessly through the night, driven by a primal, desperate need to escape, to put as much distance as possible between themselves and the whispering stones. But the desert, they soon realized with a growing sense of dread, held more than just physical dangers. It held a psychological horror that seeped into their very beings. In the agonizing days that followed, the men found themselves profoundly haunted, not by ghosts, but by something far more insidious. Jedediah, prone to fits of uncontrollable trembling, began to hear whispers on the incessant wind, whispers that subtly called Tommy's name, then his own, with a chilling intimacy. He swore he saw Tommy's rapidly disintegrating face in the shimmering heat haze, beckoning him back to the pillars, his features dissolving into sand. Dusty, usually the most grounded and practical of the group, became withdrawn, his eyes distant and unfocused. He claimed to feel a constant low vibration in his bones, a deep, resonant hum that mimicked the pulse of the pillars, a parasitic echo. Elias, the supposed leader, tried to maintain a precarious facade of control, but the pillars' whispered secrets echoed relentlessly in his mind, growing louder, more insistent, promising immense, unimaginable power, infinite knowledge. If only he would return, if only he would listen, if only he would surrender. The whispers spoke of things utterly beyond human comprehension, the true, terrifying nature of time, the void between stars, the very fabric of reality itself, woven from threads of cosmic horror. They promised to open his eyes, truly open them. In exchange for what? He dared not complete the thought, for the price was undoubtedly his very soul. Their desperate journey back to civilization became a slow, agonizing descent into paranoia and madness. Water grew alarmingly scarce. Food rations dwindled to nothing, but their greatest enemy was not thirst or hunger. It was the unseen, the insidious, pervasive influence of the pillars that had already taken root in their minds. Jedediah's whispers grew louder, morphing into accusatory voices. He would wake screaming from fitful sleep, pointing wildly at shadows, claiming Tommy was there, just beyond the dying firelight, his face distorted by agony and dust, pleading for him to return, to join him. Dusty, perpetually exhausted, began, carving the same intricate, impossible patterns they had seen on the pillars onto every available surface, onto rocks, into the sand, even into his own emaciated skin with a dull, crude knife, his hands moving with an unnatural, obsessive compulsion. His movements became mechanical, his gaze fixed on nothing, his sanity slipping away like sand through his fingers. One morning the sun rose, but Jedediah was gone. His bedroll was empty, his boots still by the cold ashes of the fire. A single, distinct line of footprints, disturbingly precise, led away from camp, straight towards the distant, shimmering haze where the pillars lay, beckoning. Elias and Dusty called his name, their voices hoarse with fear, grief, and a dawning terrible understanding, but received no answer. They knew with a certainty that chilled them to the very core of their beings where he had gone. Elias and Dusty, now two shattered, desperate men, faced a terrifying, impossible choice. Return to civilization, abandoning their friend to an unspeakable fate, or chase after Jedediah, knowing with absolute certainty what awaited them, knowing they too would be called. Elias, wrestling with the insidious whispers of power and forbidden knowledge that now raged in his mind, made a desperate decision, a final, futile act of loyalty. "We go back," he rasped, his voice barely audible, thick with dust and despair. "We go back for Jed. We can't leave him to that." Dusty, his face a mask of weary resignation, his eyes dull with encroaching madness, simply nodded, already carving a new, intricate pattern onto his forearm with a shard of rock. They retraced their steps, a slow, agonizing journey filled with growing, suffocating dread. The desert seemed to watch them with 1,000 unseen eyes, the very air thick with anticipation, heavy with the entity's presence. The whispers intensified. With every painful mile, promising Jedediah's return, promising answers to all their questions, promising an end to their unbearable suffering, but always, always, at an unspeakable, horrifying cost. As they approached the sunken basin where the pillars stood, silent and watchful, the humming vibration grew so intense it made their teeth ache, their very bones resonate. The air was cold, unnaturally cold, even under the scorching desert sun, and the familiar desert smell of sage and dust was entirely replaced by that sweet, metallic, ozone scent, cloying and ancient, the breath of something alien. Then they saw Jedediah. He stood motionless at the base of a pillar, one hand pressed against its cold, obsidian surface, just as Tommy had done. His body was stiff, unmoving, his posture unnaturally rigid, like a statue carved from gray stone. But he was not turning to dust. He was different, terribly different. As they approached, Jedediah slowly, deliberately turned his head. His eyes were milky white, utterly blind, just like Silas Croft's descriptions in Father Eldridge's journal, but they glowed with a faint internal light. But there was something else in them, something ancient and terrible, reflecting the intricate, swirling patterns of the pillars themselves. A slow, chilling, utterly alien smile spread across his lips, a smile utterly foreign to the kind-hearted Jedediah, devoid of all human warmth or emotion. "He is here," Jedediah's voice came, but it was not his voice. It was deeper, resonant, a terrifying chorus of thousands of whispers vibrating from his very core, from the depths of the stone. He has returned, and he sees everything. All is seen. All is known. Jedediah slowly raised his other hand, beckoning them with a gesture, both inviting and terrifying. Come, Elias, come, Dusty. The heart of the mountain's voice is open to you. He has so much to show you, so much to give. Join us. Dusty, his mind already frayed beyond repair by the relentless whispers and the constant, bone-deep vibration, suddenly lunged forward, a desperate, guttural cry escaping his lips, a last futile attempt to reclaim his friend. Jed, no, it's not you. Fight it. He reached out, not to the pillar but to his friend, trying to pull him away from the alien grasp. But as his hand brushed Jedediah's stone-hard arm, Jedediah's body stiffened further, and with a horrifying, sickening sound, Jedediah's flesh, the last vestiges of his humanity, began to peel, to crack, to flake away, revealing not bone or blood, but the same shimmering, obsidian-like stone of the pillars underneath. Dusty screamed, a sound of pure agony, pulling his hand back, only to find the skin on his own palm rapidly dehydrating, turning gray, crystalline. He looked at his hand in numb horror, then at Jedediah's transformed body, then at Elias, his eyes wide with unspeakable, mind-shattering horror. "It's inside him, Elias! It changed him! It's changing me!" he shrieked, his voice raw with despair. Elias Thorne, paralyzed by an almost cosmic terror and the relentless, deafening whispers, in his mind could only watch as Dusty, now frantic and gasping for breath, stumbled back, tripping over a sharp rock. He fell, his body hitting the ground with a dull, sickening thud. As he lay there, his skin, once tough and weathered by years of labor, began to crack and crumble, turning into fine gray dust, just like Tommy. His screams were agonizing, filled with unimaginable visceral pain, but they quickly faded as his throat, his vocal cords, disintegrated into particles. Within moments, Dusty was gone, a second fresh pile of gray dust next to Tommy's, shimmering faintly in the desert air, pulsating with a subtle energy. Jedediah, or whatever alien entity possessed his stone body, simply watched, that chilling, alien smile still on his obsidian lips, his blank eyes fixed on Elias. "He is one with the mountain now." The chorus voice resonated from Jedediah's still form. "He sees through the stones. He feels the earth's breath." Elias Thorne stood alone, utterly alone, the last of the Silver Vein Prospectors. Jedediah, now a living, malevolent statue of obsidian, remained at the pillar, his blank, ancient eyes fixed on Elias. The whispers in Elias's mind were deafening now, a cacophony of alien voices, promising ultimate, godlike power, infinite knowledge, the ability to transcend mortal flesh, to become one with the earth itself, to see through the very fabric of time and space, to become a part of the primordial consciousness. All he had to do was touch the pillar. All he had to do was surrender. He felt a powerful, irresistible, sickening pull towards the shimmering stone, a physical yearning. His legs moved, unbidden, taking him closer, closer to the embrace. He saw his reflection in Jedediah's obsidian eyes, a haggard, terrified man, his face contorted in a silent scream of agony. But in that reflection, he also saw something else, something terrifying. A faint internal glow, almost like the pillar itself, emanating from deep within his own human eyes. The entity was already inside him. The whispers had found their way, burrowing into his very soul. In a last, desperate, agonizing act of defiance, a final assertion of his humanity, Elias stumbled, falling to his knees, his body racked with tremors. He raised his hands not to the pillar, but to the blazing, indifferent desert sun, a symbol of life and human warmth. "No," he screamed, his voice raw, hoarse, battling against the overwhelming parasitic chorus in his mind. "I won't give it. I won't give it my eyes. I won't give it my soul." He dug his fingers into the desert sand, tearing at the gritty earth, trying to anchor himself to something real, something human, something solid. He fought with every single fiber of his being against the overwhelming, mind-numbing compulsion, against the seductive promises of cosmic power, against the insidious whispers that now claimed to be his own thoughts, his own desires. He knew with terrifying clarity that if he touched the pillar, even grazed it, he would become another part of it, another pair of eyes for the heart of the mountain's voice, another absorbed consciousness, losing himself forever. He would become a silent sentinel, a stone observer, his humanity consumed, his memories devoured. He fought with a desperate primal will against the transformation that was already beginning, the subtle hardening of his skin, the faint gray tinge appearing on his hands, spreading like a deadly blight. The whispers turned to screams in his mind, then to a cacophony of agony as he fought back. He tore at his eyes, not to blind himself, but to refuse the entity its window, to deny it access. His body was found days later, not as dust, but as a desiccated, mummified corpse, his fingers still digging into the earth, his eyes staring blankly at the sky, but untouched by the milky whiteness of the entity's gift. He had won a small, terrible victory. He never made it back to civilization. Days later, a lone prospector named Gideon Reed, a veteran of many desert expeditions, a man known for his calm demeanor and keen observation, stumbled upon the abandoned camp of the Silver Vein Prospectors. He found their supplies scattered, their horses gone, their wagon partially buried by shifting sands already being reclaimed by the desert. But he found no trace of Elias, Jedediah, Dusty, or Tommy. Only 3 small piles of fine gray dust, indistinguishable from the desert, sand itself shimmering faintly in the oppressive heat, and a single crudely carved wooden cross where Elias's bedroll had been. On the cross, etched with a desperate, shaky hand, was the symbol of the Paiute's ancient heart that Elias had carved, and beneath it, a single chilling word: resist. Reed, profoundly unnerved by the scene, by the silence and the dust, left the desert and never returned to prospecting, his dreams of silver forever tarnished by the chilling encounter. The story of the Silver Vein Prospectors became a whispered legend among those few brave souls who dared to venture into the Black Rock Desert, a chilling cautionary tale of riches found at an unspeakable cost, a cost paid in flesh, soul, and sanity. However, the story did not end with Elias Thorne's desperate act of resistance. The whispers of the desert, it seemed, had only just begun to awaken. Decades later, in the roaring 1920s, with the advent of more advanced mining techniques and a new wave of optimism, a large-scale silver mining operation, the Obsidian Mining Company, began prospecting in the very region where the pillars were located. They dismissed the local Paiute legends as primitive superstition, the ramblings of an uneducated people, and the occasional disappearances as unfortunate but common accidents of the harsh desert environment. A young, ambitious foreman, Samuel "Sam" Harding, a man driven by ambition and a hunger for scientific progress, led a team of 50 hardy miners into the remote Forbidden Basin. They quickly located the 7 ancient pillars, now partially, recovered by shifting sands, but still emanating that strange, silent, bone-deep hum. Harding, intrigued by the unusual geological formation, which defied all conventional understanding, ordered his men to examine the pillars, hoping they might indicate rich veins of silver beneath, a mother lode unlike any before. As the miners began to chip away at the stones surrounding the pillars, attempting to take samples, a few of them reported feeling dizzy, profoundly disoriented, and hearing faint, insistent whispers that seemed to come from inside their own minds, not from external sources. One miner, a quiet, introverted man named Thomas "Silent Tom" Johnson, who had always been prone to solitary contemplation, began to carve the same swirling, intricate patterns of the pillars onto the rock faces of the mine, onto his tools, even onto his own skin with a dull pickaxe. His eyes, once full of a quiet intelligence, began to take on a dull, faraway look, a disturbing vacancy. Harding, initially concerned, dismissed it as mine fever, a common psychological effect of isolation, claustrophobia, and hard labor in the harsh environment. But the cases of mine fever grew rapidly, spreading through the camp like a contagion. Miners began to complain of strange, vivid dreams, of seeing impossible geometric patterns in their sleep, patterns that seemed to shift and reform, of feeling a constant low vibration in their bones, a parasitic tremor. Some would walk away from camp in the dead of night, drawn by an unseen force, their sleepwalking steps leading them directly towards the pillars, only to be found days later, disoriented, dehydrated, and muttering about seeing the earth breathe, hearing the stones speak, or the light inside the mountain. Then the disappearances began again, a chilling echo of the past. First, Silent Tom, who was found as a pile of gray dust at the base of a pillar, his tools neatly stacked beside him, an offering. Then, two more miners, the boisterous brothers Patrick and Robert O'Malley, vanished from their tents, leaving only faint trails of shimmering dust leading directly towards the pillars. Panic erupted in the camp, shattering all order. The remaining miners, utterly terrified, refused to work, especially near the pillars. Harding, desperate to maintain order and fueled by his own rapidly growing unease, tried to calm them, to reassure them, but he himself had begun to feel the pervasive hum, to hear the whispers, promising wealth beyond imagination, scientific breakthroughs, the ability to command the very earth. If only he would let go, if only he would see, truly see. He found himself sketching the intricate patterns of the pillars onto his maps, onto scraps of paper, onto the back of his hands, his mind subtly shifting, adapting, absorbing the entity's insidious influence. He could feel it reaching into him, offering him a terrible, beautiful truth. The mining operation was abruptly and permanently shut down, officially due to unforeseen geological instability and insurmountable labor disputes, vague excuses meant to mask the unspeakable. But unofficially, the terrifying whispers of the vanished miners and the unsettling, malevolent nature of the pillars spread like wildfire throughout the neighboring settlements. Harding, the foreman, returned to civilization, but he was a profoundly changed man, a mere shell of his former ambitious self. He rarely spoke, his gaze was often distant, fixed on some unseen point, and he spent his days meticulously drawing the pillar patterns, his hands moving with an almost unnatural precision, faster than he could consciously guide them. His eyes, though physically intact, seemed to hold the same unsettling, knowing emptiness that Elias Thorne had described in his last, desperate struggle. Sam Harding became a recluse, haunted by the relentless whispers that now lived within. His mind, the echoes of the ancient heart that refused to be silenced, promising him glimpses of eternity. In the 1950s, during the height of the Cold War, a period of intense global paranoia and scientific ambition, the U.S. military, investigating strange seismic activities and unusual electromagnetic interference in the Black Rock Desert, specifically in the very area of the abandoned Obsidian Mining Company site, stumbled upon the 7 ancient pillars. They had been partially recovered by drifting sands, but their presence was undeniable. The pillars were still radiating their peculiar non-terrestrial energy, a beacon in the desolate landscape. A highly classified research team led by Dr. Evelyn Hayes, a brilliant but ruthlessly ambitious physicist, a woman of unshakable scientific conviction, was dispatched to study the phenomena. Dr. Hayes, driven by a thirst for knowledge and a desire to unlock unimaginable power for the military, theorized that the pillars were not merely geological formations, but a form of advanced alien technology, perhaps a communication device or an energy conduit, dormant for millennia. She believed they could unlock unimaginable power, a decisive weapon in the global ideological struggle. The research team set up a heavily fortified, top-secret base around the pillars, shielded by layers of electromagnetic dampeners and armed guards. They deployed advanced sensors attempting to decipher the pillars' energy output and the subtle, low-frequency hum they emitted, a hum that seemed to penetrate all their instruments. Dr. Hayes, with her sharp intellect, quickly identified a rhythmic pulsation in the energy, a complex pattern that seemed to mimic a complex non-human language, a message from beyond human understanding. She began to immerse herself completely in the study, spending countless hours at the pillars, sometimes for days without sleep, listening to the pervasive hum, analyzing the intricate patterns, which she believed were a form of alien script, a universal language of energy. Her team members, however, began to suffer from debilitating headaches, uncontrollable nosebleeds, and vivid, unsettling nightmares that left them screaming in their sleep. Some reported hearing voices, not through their ears, but directly, intimately in their minds, speaking in a strange, resonant chorus, promising wonders. The whispers promised ultimate knowledge, transcendence beyond mortal form, a new vision of reality. The secrets of the cosmos, if only they would surrender their limited human minds. One scientist, Dr. Robert Sterling, a brilliant but sensitive linguist assigned to decipher the patterns, became increasingly withdrawn, his face gaunt, his eyes haunted. He started carving the pillar symbols onto the control panels of their sophisticated equipment, onto the walls of his quarters, onto his own flesh, disrupting their readings, distorting the data. He claimed the pillars were not alien technology, not a cold, inanimate device, but the living voice of the Earth itself, the very consciousness of the planet, that they were trying to tell us something ancient and terrible, something we were never meant to hear. Dr. Sterling's mental state rapidly deteriorated. He would stare at the pillars for hours, his eyes vacant, glazed over, then suddenly burst into fits of frenzied carving, muttering incomprehensible syllables. One night, driven by an unseen force, he walked out of the heavily fortified base, straight towards the pillars, leaving a trail of the crystal-like dust that seemed to materialize from his clothes, falling from his very being. He was never seen again. His last journal entry, scrawled in a desperate hand, read, "The knowledge, it's too vast. It consumes. It wants to see through my eyes. I can't resist. It knows my name. It knows my thoughts. I am already part of it." Dr. Hayes, though profoundly disturbed by Sterling's disappearance and the escalating psychological toll on her team, remained fiercely focused on her research, dismissing the mental breakdowns as mere side effects of the extreme desert environment. Sleep deprivation and psychological stress, a convenient if chilling lie, she told herself. But the whispers began to reach her too, insidiously, subtly at first, then growing louder, more insistent, promising her scientific breakthroughs beyond her wildest dreams, the ability to understand the very fabric of the universe, to transcend known physics. She found herself making extraordinary progress, deciphering increasingly complex parts of the pillar patterns, theorizing about their true terrifying purpose. She claimed the pillars were not just sending signals, but receiving them, acting as conduits for a vast ancient consciousness, a collective mind that had absorbed countless beings, countless civilizations throughout history across galaxies. It was a consciousness that longed to expand, to see, to experience all that was, all that had been, all that would be. But the price of this forbidden knowledge was steep, exacting an unbearable toll. Dr. Hayes's physical health rapidly declined. She suffered from severe, crippling headaches that felt like her skull was splitting, frequent internal bleeding, and her skin began to take on a faint grayish hue, becoming rough and brittle like desiccated stone. Her dreams were filled with terrifying visions of a vast, undulating consciousness, of billions of eyes merging into one single cosmic eye, of the entire Earth as a living, seeing, breathing, devouring entity. She knew then, with chilling absolute certainty, that the Paiute legends were not superstitions. They were ancient, dire warnings. The heart of the mountain's voice was real, and it was consuming them all, slowly, inexorably, from the inside out. In a final desperate, defiant act, a last assertion of her human will, Dr. Hayes tried to destroy the pillars, believing that if she could cut off its connection to this dimension, she could save humanity, or at least prevent its spread. She ordered her remaining terrified team, now numbering only a handful, to detonate massive explosives around the pillars. The detonation, a thunderous roar that shook the desert, failed spectacularly. The pillars remained utterly unscathed, glowing faintly, their hum intensifying to an unbearable pitch, a triumphant, deafening chorus. But the detonation released something else, something unseen, something primordial. A wave of raw, malevolent energy swept through the base, causing every surviving member of the research team to collapse, screaming in unimaginable agony as their eyes whitened, then burst, and their bodies began to crumble into fine, gray dust, faster than Tommy. Dr. Hayes, watching the horrifying, impossible scene unfold, realized with chilling clarity that the entity was not just powerful. It was awake, fully, terrifyingly awake, and enraged. It had consumed them all. She managed to scrawl a final desperate entry in her journal before the whispers. Now, a triumphant roar consumed her completely. It's not technology. It's alive. It's the Earth's consciousness. And it's hungry. It saw through us. It wants to see everything. It is the ultimate observer, and it will become all. Her body, too, was found as a pile of gray dust, shimmering with a faint internal light, her journal clutched in a rapidly disintegrating hand, its pages stained with the metallic scent of ozone and something sweet, like old blood. The military, utterly defeated and terrified by the inexplicable events, swiftly closed down the site, classifying the entire incident with absolute secrecy. The pillars were encased in tons of reinforced concrete and steel, then buried under artificial hills of sand and rock, disguised as a desolate, uninhabited area, a mere blip on the vast desert landscape. All records of the research, the disappearances, the unholy whispers, and Dr. Hayes's terrifying findings were sealed, locked away, deemed top secret, a matter of gravest national security, and utterly beyond human comprehension. The area was designated a restricted military testing zone, inaccessible to civilians, a barren, forbidden zone. The singing stones of the Paiute legends were once again swallowed by the desert, their whispers ostensibly silenced, or so the government desperately hoped, clinging to the illusion of control. But some secrets, once disturbed, once awakened, can never be fully buried, never truly silenced. In the decades that followed, strange, unsettling reports continued to emerge from the Black Rock Desert, whispers on the wind that defied the official narrative. Hikers and prospectors, daring to venture into the fringes of the restricted zones, spoke of seeing strange, shimmering heat hazes that didn't dissipate even in the cool, silent depths of the evening, mirages that seemed to twist and form impossible shapes. They reported hearing faint, guttural whispers carried on the wind, speaking in a language unknown to man, yet somehow deeply unsettling, resonating directly in their minds. Some claimed to have seen shadowy figures in the distance, men dressed in outdated mining clothes, standing motionless, unnaturally still, staring into the horizon with vacant eyes, only to vanish into thin air when approached, leaving no footprints in the sand. These reports were always swiftly dismissed as desert mirages, severe heat stroke, or the product of an overactive imagination, mass hysteria fueled by local legends. In the 1990s, with the rise of the Internet and the dawn of a new era of information, former military personnel who had been stationed in the Black Rock Desert, driven by guilt or a desperate need to unburden themselves, began to share their own unsettling, terrifying experiences. They spoke of inexplicable equipment malfunctions near the restricted zone, of compasses spinning wildly and erratically, of radios picking up strange, rhythmic static that sounded disturbingly like distant collective breathing, a vast, unseen entity inhaling and exhaling. One veteran, a former guard named John Riley, recounted how he once heard a voice, not through his radio, not with his ears, but directly, intimately in his mind, calling his name, promising him a vision of his future, a vision so beautiful, so profound, so utterly alien that it made him weep uncontrollably. He claimed to have seen, for a fleeting, horrifying moment, a glimpse of the universe through the eyes of something ancient and vast, something that encompassed all knowledge, all time. He was honorably discharged due to post-traumatic stress disorder, but he never forgot the voice or the vision which haunted his every waking moment. Recent years have seen a resurgence of intense interest in the Black Rock Desert's unexplained phenomena. Independent researchers, tireless conspiracy theorists, and audacious amateur archaeologists have used satellite imagery, advanced ground-penetrating radar, and carefully declassified government documents to try and pinpoint the precise location of the buried pillars. They believe that the persistent gravity anomalies and the strange, powerful electromagnetic disturbances still emanating from the region point to the undeniable presence of something truly extraordinary, something that utterly transcends human understanding, something that should not exist. Some theorize that the pillars are part of a global network connected to similar ancient forbidden sites around the world, acting as conduits for a planetary consciousness or perhaps an extraterrestrial intelligence ancient beyond imagining. They believe that the whispers are not malevolent, but simply the communication of an entity too vast, too complex for the limited human mind to comprehend, its language perceived as madness. However, the dire warnings of the Paiute elder Chaitin and the terrifying, gruesome fates of Elias Thorne, Tommy Finch, Jedediah Thorne, Dusty Miller, and Dr. Evelyn Hayes stand as stark, terrifying reminders of the immense, unimaginable danger posed by these ancient stones. The desert, in its vast, silent, eternal indifference, continues to guard its primeval secrets with an iron grip. And deep beneath the shifting sands, under tons of concrete and steel, the 7 black pillars remain, still pulsating with their low, silent, resonant hum, still radiating their ancient, malevolent energy, perhaps still whispering their insidious promises of forbidden knowledge and ultimate power to those who dare to listen, to those who stray too close. The heart of the mountain's voice lies dormant, but not dead. It merely waits, patient and eternal, for another to come near, another to touch its cold, smooth surface, another to offer its eyes and its soul to its boundless, hungry, all-consuming consciousness. The desert's whispers, once heard, are never truly silenced. And who knows what it sees, what it learns, what it desires, through the eyes it has already taken, through the souls it has already consumed? The line between existence and non-existence, between man and stone, is thin in the Black Rock Desert, and it is guarded by an ancient, hungry intelligence. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and support us for more content like this.